Hey everybody, Professor Snart here checking in. Okay, so we've made good progress through some of the earlier units in our course, and we are now at our first workshop unit, which is actually a set of different due dates. So I'm going to walk us through how this works. Like I mentioned before, our course is kind of like anchored by a series of workshops where you produce a piece of writing. Our first one is going to be a short story or short fiction. You will find yourself in a group. Everyone, writes their short story, submits it to the discussion board, and then everyone in the group gets that file, marks it up with lots of comments, and then provides it back to the person. So that's fundamentally how our workshops are going to function, and you'll see that we have our fiction workshop here, and then we move to a different genre and do creative nonfiction workshop, different genre poetry workshop, so you get the idea. So we've worked through kind of our introductory phase to the course, thought about some basic ideas about writing that kind of apply across genres. It doesn't really matter whether you're doing short fiction or poetry or whatever. And now we'll focus our attention on short fiction. Okay, so just technically speaking, this is how things work. We've just finished up Unit 4 and Unit 3 due the same day, June 8th. We now move into our fiction workshop. We have our first due date, which is going to be when you have to have written your short story and posted your work, and that's Monday, June 13th. So this is really where the creative writing in the compressed format becomes even more challenging, or just something that you sort of have to deal with. It is the way it is. Hopefully you've been maybe thinking about or tinkering with ideas for a short story up to this point, but now in a relatively short period of time you need to turn around and produce a relatively complete short story, which is quick. I mean, it's hard to write on command like we're doing anyway, but now you're doing it in a really compressed time frame. The thing to keep in mind, though, is that the purpose of a workshop is to get feedback on a work in progress. So if you think of a piece of writing as existing kind of on a continuum, from the very first ideas or notes that you make, just the really earliest version of that thing, even if it's not on paper or on the screen, it's just an idea. That's one end of it. And then let's just say the published version of that thing, even if you're not interested in publishing, but like the most complete version would be the opposite end of that spectrum. Our workshop work should really be somewhere in the middle of that, maybe a little bit past middle, but obviously you can't submit just a basic idea or an outline for the short story. We don't want something that's that early in the writing process. But you're also not expected to be submitting something that you think doesn't need any more changes, or that you've written and revised over the period of weeks or months or years or anything like that, this perfectly polished thing. And if you're not open to making changes, then what's the point of the workshop? So yeah, it's a quick turnaround, but beyond having a more or less complete text in place with a beginning, middle, and end, as we've looked at in earlier units, you're by no means required to have this perfect short story. And again, the grading in the class, which is something I'll talk about again in a second, is really set up to promote just you getting the work done and getting the most out of it. Not you having to feel like you've got to produce this perfect short story in this really limited time frame, and I'm going to grade every sentence for how, again, perfect it is, which is none of that is the case. So if you're worried about the quick turnaround, always keep in mind how the workshop's supposed to work, like what its purpose is, and then the way the grading works for the course, but really for these workshops in particular, is largely based on, and the bar is pretty low, I'm going to be honest here. Did you post your work on time? That's a real challenge, right? Is it in a format that we can access? Like, is it just a basic document file and not some esoteric thing that nobody can access, or just paste it into the discussion board? We need it as a file. So you paste it on time, you've pasted as a file, or you've posted as a file, I should say. All pretty easy, I think. So that's part of the grade. Notice it has nothing to do with the so-called quality of the work. There clearly needs to be an investment of time, right, and energy, not just something that's slapped together that makes no sense at all, or is missing huge pieces, or is just a paragraph. So there needs to be an investment of effort. But again, it's not like, is this the most perfect short story and that gets an A and everything else gets a lesser grade? It just doesn't work that way. And then the other part of a workshop grade is going to be the feedback part. So again, did you reply to everybody in your group who posted on time? In other words, did you return their file marked up with lots of comments within the document? So we're not just reading a story and writing a paragraph in the discussion board that sort of sums up our feelings and our reactions. You can do that, but fundamentally, and this is all laid out in the How the Workshops Work area, which we'll look at in a second, what each writer in the group wants to get back from everybody else in the group is their file, but marked up with lots of comments about what's working, what's not working, examples, things to change, things they really liked. So lots and lots of kind of line by line or very kind of microscopic details, not a big picture, I liked it, or this is great. That's nice to hear, but it's not very useful as a writer. So anyway, if you do that, then that's the other part of the workshop grade. So notice that very little of it actually depends on how, sophisticated a writer you are. It's a sort of introductory class, so it doesn't make sense to expect, the great American novel from people. And truthfully, some people have been writing creatively for a long time. Others are just interested in getting started or getting restarted if it's something you used to do. Some people are short story writers, other people do poetry. So again, people are just sort of like, their experience is so all over the map. It doesn't make sense for me to kind of pass judgment on the work as a work of fiction or poetry or whatever. It's really more about your investment in the workshop experience, posting on time as an accessible file, and then really honestly what I care about is the quality of the feedback that you're getting. Okay, so a couple other things then. As far as the grading goes, that's how the numbers break down, or what I'm looking for. And as far as the feedback from me goes, I'll tell you right up front that just based on the number of students that I'm working with and the time frame, I don't provide a lot of feedback on your work directly. I'm more interested in the quality of the feedback that you provide. And so a couple of things. First, I do that partly so that students sort of invest and start to value that feedback they get from their peers. If I weigh in a ton, not only is it sort of time-wise impossible and you'd be waiting forever, but then students are kind of, they maybe glance at the student feedback, but they pay more attention to mine. It just throws the whole thing off kilter. And the other thing is that if you are interested in getting really more intense feedback from me, I'm happy to set up an appointment where we could meet face-to-face, or we can connect virtually if you're not anywhere near campus or don't want to be near campus. So if you're willing to invest that time that we could meet for even just like 10 minutes or whatever, I'm more than happy to provide feedback, but I don't do it as a blanket rule, again, for the reasons that I'm kind of laying out here. Okay, so how the workshops work then as far as kind of looking at the unit. So we can see in our short story workshop unit here, there's sort of a walkthrough of basically what the discussion board is going to look like. These are obviously screenshots from a past course since I just set our groups up. The whole thing is kind of going to walk you through what it's going to look like. Obviously, again, you'll see your names here, not someone else's. Reminder that you're posting your document using the attached file here. RTF is good. Any kind of Word document tends to be pretty good. Avoid pages, and that's sort of the only one that tends to trip people up. So just be careful with that Mac format. Okay, so here's the groups you'll find yourself in. You can click into the discussion board. You'll find the thread already set up. So just find your name, pop in there, reply to my initial kind of like empty post, and that's where you put your file in. Again, that's due date number 1, the posting due date. Once that's passed, you can go in and grab everybody in your group who posted on time in an accessible format, grab that file, and then I'll show you real quick how the workshops work. Okay, so this is kind of what we're looking for. There's different ways of doing this. It doesn't really matter exactly what mechanism, it's the result that you're looking for. I will remind you then the golden rule really applies. You don't want to invest very little in providing feedback to others, but then expect a whole bunch of feedback from them. So be sure you're kind of being equal and aware of your participation in a group. So when you grab somebody's file, you'll have their short story. You could use the sort of official commenting function that's available in Word and lots of other word processors. Notice as these screenshots show that the comments are coming throughout, not line by line exactly, but it's certainly not just a couple sprinkled throughout the document. I like this, I didn't like that. So they're really specific. There's lots of kind of meat on the bone here. Another way of doing it is maybe just with like a square bracket within the text, but try to use some highlighting so it's not impossible for the writer of this work to then go in and find your comments. So basically what you as a writer are going to get is you've got a short story that's kind of like halfway between just an idea and when you'd call it really done. And depending on the size of your group and the number of people who participate correctly and on time, you'll get probably like 3 or 4 of your document back, but with a whole bunch of different comments from all those different readers. And again, that's the value of the workshop. So if one person says the title's not so clear, or they didn't like the ending or whatever, you can take that for what it's worth for you as the writer. But if all of your people suddenly say, I was really confused at the start, or I noticed that you shifted from past tense to present and then past again, if everybody notices that, then it probably is something that you'd want to pay attention to. So again, it's kind of the group dynamic of the workshop that really makes it work and makes it valuable for you as a writer, for each of us as writers. Notice the other areas here. I'm actually directing you to, in Unit 5, you'll be directed to look at all this stuff. How the workshops work, again, kind of walks you through what I've just talked about, right? What we value, what we're looking for, kind of how the grading works. A basic how to post, which is probably not going to be an issue for most folks. Since we've done this already for past units, you're attaching a file, not just pasting the text in the editor there. And again, just make sure the file is an accessible format. And in my experience, the .pages for the Mac word processing program is kind of the only one that trips people up. I personally can't open that one. How to provide feedback, we just looked at, right? Making sure that it's throughout the document. And there's lots of it. That's fundamentally what I'm grading, beyond just you posting on time and doing things on time. And then the workshop grading, again, the stuff I just talked about. So you can review it, but again, it's not the quality of the work per se, or you don't have to be worried about that, especially given our quick turnaround. But it is 100 points, so it's pretty significant in the overall scheme of things. But so much of it is just low-hanging fruit. You've posted on time in the right format, and then you're returning that file marked up with comments throughout. So again, it's pretty easy money, honestly, in some ways. But obviously, if you just ignore this video or don't do the course in the way that it's set up, then you're also likely to lose a lot of points because you just do it incorrectly. But okay, so once again, we are into Unit 5, our short story workshop. Groups are down here at the bottom. The discussion board is set up. And then one more time, we'll look at our due dates here. So posting your work by Monday, the 13th, providing feedback to everybody in your group who posted on time in a format that you can access. Wednesday, June 15th. So again, not a lot of turnaround, but we are going to move quickly. And then we get on to our next genre, which is creative nonfiction. We'll do a couple more units and then another workshop. So you probably get the pattern of the course is becoming a little bit clearer. Hard to believe that by next week, right about here, we're at midterm for our 5-week course. So I know it feels pretty intense. We're moving pretty quickly, but hang in there. It goes really, really fast, and that's sort of the glass half full and the glass half empty at the same time. As always, if you have questions or concerns, be in touch with me.